Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Mark Pastor. I am in product management at Quantum. I'm responsible for our ActiveScale object storage product and other archive solutions. And joining me is Sherman Shoresman, who is in our technical marketing group. Sherman, hello.
Hi, Mark. How's everybody doing?
All right, so this presentation for this segment will be talking about object storage and other archive solutions for long-term content management, and I do appreciate everybody's time. So if you've been listening in on some of the other Quantum presentations, this diagram may be getting familiar to you. This diagram basically lays out the various ways that Quantum can contribute to a really complete end-to-end workflow for media and entertainment workflows. And so on the left, we have our StorNext product with F-Series, which is really the primary high-performance storage side of the workflow. And then on the right side of this slide, you see we have our ActiveScale object storage solution, and we also have our StorNext tape archive solution mentioned there. And so those are the secondary storage platforms, and we'll be talking about a little bit of both of those today in this session. Okay, so Quantum, as I just mentioned, we do have really a pretty comprehensive storage portfolio to address all portions of media workflows. And so this really just tells you how we kind of see these things fitting together in our portfolio. So on the upper left side of this chart, you'll see things like our F-Series with NVMe, software-defined storage, the StorNext scale-out file storage system, QXS. And so these are all typically referred to them as primary storage. They're the higher performance. Because they're higher performance, they typically use more expensive technology, and so they're typically higher cost than some of the other products. The other product specifically in the lower right corner, we've got our scalar tape storage solution, and that reinforces, our view. As a matter of fact, we see kind of a resurgence in the tape market, but tape continues to be the lowest cost storage technology out there, and it's still, very reliable and durable, and so people really like that technology for long-term deep archives where the content may not be so active. And then in the middle, we've got the ActiveScale object storage platform. Very excited that we've acquired that technology. We've actually been participating in it for many years, and so now it's under the Quantum umbrella of technology that we own. And really, that's positioned as kind of a cost-effective tier, but it's extremely durable, and because it's object storage, it's highly searchable. Provides tremendous access to a large number of users and applications. So the object storage platform really fills a very useful spot that we'll be talking about. I'll talk about both of these secondary storage tiers in this presentation. So one of the reasons that we're pretty excited about the ActiveScale technology for media and entertainment workflows is because we've actually heard from quite a bit of our customers. Quantum has a pretty strong presence in the media entertainment space with our StorNext file system and other solutions. And as we talk to customers about, what they're looking for to store their, large and growing libraries of content, are really these four things really kind of highlight some of the very key tenets that we look for and customers are looking for in a storage infrastructure for their content library. First of all, one of the things that's really important is you want a storage infrastructure where you can store your content cost effectively, and you also want it to be able to hold your primary copy of content. So in other words, once you create, capture, whatever your content, maybe go through some form of workflow on high performance storage, you want a place where you can store it that's lower cost. Otherwise, you keep building up this very expensive pool of storage that most people really can't afford. And so what's a cost-effective tier where I can have pretty much online access to all my content, but it costs less, and I also have a great sense of security that it's in a durable location so that my content will be safe and protected, and it won't get lost through bit rot and other things. So ActiveScale object storage certainly fits that, because we've got our integrated erasure code technology, which spreads the data across many components. It's much more durable than RAID storage, and we also have the ability, I'll talk a little bit later about our ability to spread that across multiple locations, so that you can actually protect yourself not only against component failure, but site disaster and other things for disaster recovery or business continuity. So that's durability and primary storage. The other thing that's really important, because we're talking about long-term retention, and we certainly find that more and more companies and organizations are continuing to retain content as long as they possibly can, because there's always value in that content, and sometimes you don't know which one's going to be the most valuable. So it's much more comfortable to keep it all, because it's very difficult to decide what to delete. And so as you keep all this content, more and more content is getting generated every day. You'll want an infrastructure, a storage infrastructure that can continue to grow as your content grows. And so ActiveScale object storage, is really good for that, because you can basically, buy a base unit, and then you can add scale up and scale out components to it very seamlessly. So the whole infrastructure can grow in capacity. User interface is very easy. Very simple UI to just add a new storage component to an existing installation. And that's a great way to scale your storage capacity as your needs grow over time. We really like to position ActiveScale as kind of a store forever platform that can continue to grow with you, and also over time that you can update technologies underneath, decommission old technology, add new technology as you go. So really architected well for those capabilities. The other thing that's really strong about object storage in general is the searchability of it. So as you know, object storage a little bit different than file in the sense that it still has your content, but it also has very extensive metadata, and everything is really stored as kind of a flat file space. And so everything is accessible, equally. And the important thing is, can I find what I'm looking for? And that's why object storage inherently has this enhanced metadata capabilities. So, software can be involved, user processes can be involved to really add more information, more intelligence about the content that you're storing in the object store. And that makes it very highly searchable by a variety of software that understands object. And there's a lot more software. Talk about this a little bit later, but more and more software today has become S3 or object compliant than it has been in the past. And that's because of a lot of these strengths that you can get by organizing and gathering, collecting large pools of content that are highly searchable. And then finally, when you put all these things together, these are really functional attributes that I've talked about the product. But then you need, it's got to be easy to use, easy to set up, easy to manage, and easy to use. And I've told the story a couple times now. One of our larger customers just a couple of weeks ago has, told us that he needed to log into our what we call system manager user interface, which you see a snapshot of in the lower left. Just to check on the status of the system, make sure that the users are using it, and that there's activity, because it's been installed for months, and there's really been very little interaction that he or his department has had to do with the product, because it's just, it self-heals. He hasn't had to give it any attention at all. It's just kept running for his organization. So it's effectively, he's got a really nice, cloud storage, cloud object-oriented storage on his in his data center that everybody's using, and it's going very smooth and seamless. And so, the reliability of the system is super important, but the ability to easily interrogate it, run reports on it, look at activity, look at the status of all the hardware and everything else is super important. And so it's a very simple and elegant user interface that we've got a lot of really positive feedback on. So a little bit more about the product. So the ActiveScale solution is available with two models. We have the P100 and the X100. We call the P100 our modular product, and so it basically scales up within a rack, but then you can actually add up to 3 racks in a single site environment, but you can also then scale it out across multiple sites as well. When you do that, you can have up to 27 petabytes of raw capacity with the P100. The X100 is sold as full rack components where you can buy the base unit, and then you can actually just build storage by adding sleds of drives inside the rack. Ultimately, when you put 9 of those fully stuffed racks together, you can have up to 74 petabytes of raw capacity. And what's common about both of these is they both have the system manager user interface that I was talking about on the previous slide. They also both interact with what we call Cloud Manager. Cloud Manager is a cloud-based web UI that you can use to actually have more or less a single pane of glass across all of your ActiveScale instances, and you can interrogate them to find out, capacity utilization, activity, component status, user status, a variety of things that you want in order to properly manage your environment with the expected large amount of users and applications that will be leveraging this capability. So that's the products and the user interface components to it. So just a little bit more about how you configure it. So as I talked about, in a single geography, this is an example of the X100. I can have 9 racks. That's how I get the 74 petabytes of raw storage. Because we use erasure code instead of RAID, which actually gives you much higher durability. There's a little bit of overhead associated with that. There is with RAID as well, but the overhead with our erasure code is 25% on a single site. And so the usable storage for the 9 racks there would be 59 petabytes of usable capacity. In a 3GEO instance that you can see on the lower half of the slide, the 74 petabytes has a little more overhead because we've got 3GEO sharing going on. So the overhead there is more like 63%. And so the usable storage there is 45 petabytes. Now, if you ever have a system where you do have 3 sites where you want to have 3 copies of your data so that all sites have access to the data, which they do with ActiveScale, keep in mind that the alternative is to really have 3 copies of your data. So the overhead in that situation would be something more like 200%. So 63% overhead to have all of your content shareable across 3 locations and have it highly durable is really, really good. The other thing I'd say, and I mentioned it earlier about the 3GEO configuration, is because it's erasure code based, even though we don't have 3 full copies, with that 63% overhead, you can actually have one site go completely down and the other 2 sites will continue to have full access to all of your content in the environment. And so just because a site goes down, you haven't lost your content. And of course, that's the same thing for any kind of component failures that go on within the system as well. So again, that's why the erasure code technology, and particularly the way that we've implemented it with ActiveScale, we call it bit spread technology, is really effective for maintaining content in a very highly durable container. So there's just a little bit more, commentary about the user interface. So you saw a figure like this, like a screen capture on a couple charts ago. And, as I mentioned, like with this one user, it's pretty much a set and forget operation. You install it, you set it up, you make sure, you've got your policies and your IP addresses all set up, and then you pretty much let it go. And it's, it takes care of, healing data itself. That's the whole idea about the erasure code implementation. And the only reason you need to come back to it, is on scheduled basis. If you do have some drive failures that have occurred over time, you have the ability to come in and replace those drives. Or if you need to come and check and make sure, that you get reports on utilization and things like that, as the user that I mentioned previously, you can come to the user interface and run reports and that sort of thing, so that you can manage chargebacks or whatever you need to do. for users in your environment. There's a lot of guided wizards for the setup, including adding and growing your capacity. There's user and account management capabilities in the GUI, one-click upgrades, all kinds of good tools. And of course, there's an API as well so that you can run scripts or have applications interact with the user interface as well, or with the command structure. So anyway, so that's the GUI, what it looks like. Very extensive, but nice and simple and modern design. One of the things I mentioned earlier, just to say it, reinforce it a little bit, is we've been selling, Quantum's been selling out object storage for quite some time. And what I would say is, if you compare the state of the industry 5-6 years ago to where it is today in terms of software packages that support object that are now object compatible. I say S3 compatible here since that's the API that we base ActiveScale on. But just object compatible in general, that has grown tremendously over the past 5 years. And so in addition to being able to interface ActiveScale with StorNext, which a lot of you do, the other thing is what we've seen is a lot of the asset management, MAM and DAM products from the various companies, almost all of them now support object orientation or S3 compatibility. And so now they can actually use an object storage infrastructure like ActiveScale, with StorNext as well as independent of StorNext, for management of content, over its life. So, the world has changed quite a bit, and by installing an object storage infrastructure in your environment, there's a lot more use that you can get out of it now because there's so much more software that's compatible with it. Okay, so that's the ActiveScale object storage discussion. In the next few slides, I'll wrap up with, we'll talk about what's new in terms of our tape archive. We've also done some pretty exciting things there. So you may have seen that we've announced a new version of StorNext 6.4, and in that announcement, we've included one of the features mentioned is DLP, or Dynamic Library Pooling. And what that feature does, it's part of StorNext, and it actually allows you to manage a set of independent libraries as a pool of storage. And so the example that we're showing here, you've got a bunch of different scalar i6 libraries, which are Quantum's rack-based libraries, put together. And when you put them together and you can manage them as a whole, we refer to that as a RAIL architecture, so redundant array of independent libraries. And redundant being an important word because when you put multiple libraries together, of course, you've got high redundancy. Each library is a redundant set of parts to the other libraries. So you've got multiple robots, multiple drives, multiple cartridges, etc. And StorNext with DLP now has some extra capabilities to really take full advantage of libraries that are organized in this fashion. And what we found, by working, very closely with a lot of the larger organizations out there and hyperscalers and public cloud offerings, as well as many, smaller organizations, is that there's a lot more flexibility and benefits in setting up your storage infrastructure for colder archive content this way, as opposed to, and one of the differences I would say is if you, the traditional way, of course, if you've got a large scale amount of storage you want to use tape, typically you would use an enterprise class library. That's more of the monolithic type where you add frames to the same library. You basically have a robot or two that's in common that goes across the whole span of the library, and that's the traditional way of doing it. From a floor space perspective, of course, you have to have that contiguous space available to organize a traditional library. In a rack-based library approach, like what we're talking about here, you can actually position those racks anywhere you want within your data center, as long as they reach within the limitations of the fiber channel or cable, whatever you've got set up to communicate to them. So really good from floor space, and I'll talk a little bit more about density in a moment. The benefits that you get with this type of an infrastructure, a lot of people we've talked to, over the past 3-4 years, the public cloud has gotten a lot of attention. There's a lot of benefits that people have been looking for in terms of, low cost of entry. But if you actually compare the type of infrastructure that we're talking about here, when you include StorNext as an example, with the appliances that it's on, with the tape libraries, you can still get substantially lower cost storage infrastructure compared to disk-based storage and compared to public cloud-based storage. So it's really still the most economical way of doing it is to set up an infrastructure like what we're talking about here, where you can just have a deep archive available in your data center, manage it yourself, and achieve these lower costs and high durability. So very scalable. If you want to scale up a system like that, you just add another library into the pool and just configure that, and it'll start to run with that additional storage available. And of course, compared to public cloud offerings, most of the archive offerings with public cloud, you'll have some sort of egress fee. You might have some bandwidth charges if you're moving up a lot of content up into the cloud, and so you can avoid some of the fees that have been more commonly realized with public cloud by leveraging public cloud infrastructure for these type of archive use cases. So really good, new development and a great way of using StorNext to provide a digital tape archive just by adding this DLP feature. Just to elaborate a little bit, so DLP, as I mentioned, stands for Dynamic Library Pooling, and really what it does, just to show you a little bit more about how it works, is you organize your libraries in terms of pools. I used to call them buckets, but that gets confusing. So you've got pools of libraries, and what DLP does, it's really a piece of software. It makes sure that you have a primary copy of your content and a secondary copy of your content, and that those two pieces of content are on separate libraries. So in the event that a library fails, you'll still have your content available to you. It also rotates the writing operation. So when if you're writing lots of content into your environment, the more traditional way of dealing with that is data would typically be written to the first library that's available with the drives that are in that library and the media cartridges that are in that library, and it would typically do that until that library gets filled up, and then it would move to the next library, et cetera. Well, with DLP instead, we actually proactively rotate the writing operations across the pools of libraries so that we actually do a little bit more performance and wear leveling, more is really what it feels like. So we'll write the first chunk of files that come into the first library, make the protection copies in another library. The next chunk of files will go to another library with their protection copies in another library as well. And it just keeps rotating around depending on the number of libraries that you have in your environment and how you structure these pools. So pretty slick new feature. And really helps manage, scalability, durability, of low cost, archive content. So I think I've spoken to most of these capabilities already. So dynamic library pooling with a redundant array of independent libraries, gives you benefits that are listed here. I talked about durability and availability. You've got the high redundancy that you can use for performance purposes, as we talked about in the last bullet of this slide, but as well for durability and availability. So if a library goes down, as I mentioned, you'll still have your content on another library, you can get to it. It not only does it wear level the robots, so I'm using them more equally and not relying on any particular one. I'm avoiding hotspots, by not trying to write everything to one library at the same time. And I'm also, able to spread my load a little bit. So if I'm reading many files back at the same time, they're most likely spread across different libraries, and I can take advantage of the different robots and the different drives that are spread across the libraries to get my data back. I did mention density earlier, but Scalar i6 is really among the highest density libraries out there in the industry. And so, by putting them together, you actually can create an extremely dense configuration for storing data on tape. So you get super low cost, super durability, super density, and a lot of good reasons to architect your solution, as we talked about here. All right, so just to wrap up and summarize what we've talked about. So we started out talking about the ActiveScale object storage, which is really a perfect platform for long-term content storage across the life of content, particularly while it's active or you want to have online access to it. Super durable. You can spread it across multiple locations for sharing and durability purposes. And then we talked about Quantum StorNext with our DLP feature that allows you to take advantage of rail type of architecture, which really provides the lowest cost archive, which is really good for deeper archive sorts of use cases. So that's it. Hopefully there's been something new and informative for you there. If you want to learn more about any of these things, we certainly encourage you to reach out to your local quantum representative, and we'll see if there's any questions that have come in while I've been talking. So I do appreciate your time.
Hey, hi, Mark. Yeah, the question did come in, and it's the question is about the usable or the overhead of that slide you showed with the 9 systems.
Yeah. Okay.
Why is the overhead so much more with a 3 geo than a single site? So I think I could answer that.
Please.
If the overhead with erasure coding comes because you create parity and you spread the parity around over systems, and the amount of parity you create depends on how much hardware failures you need to be able to accommodate. And so in a single site, we want to be able to continue functioning with the loss of an entire rack plus a storage node in each of the other remaining racks. And so the parity, how much parity is based on that much hardware loss. Well, in a 3 geo, we have a similar thing, but we have to be able to survive an entire site going down plus a storage node and all the remaining nodes in the other 2 geos. So there's just a lot more parity going on, which is why we get the overhead. But overall, we're still much more efficient than doing something like replication.
Excellent. Thank you, Sherman. Anything else come in?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, as a reminder, by the way, we will randomly select 3 winners to receive a $25 Uber Eats gift card. So hopefully one of you is a lucky winner there. You'll get receive those via email. And again, we do appreciate you taking the time to attend, and feel free to follow up if you have additional questions. Thank you very much.